When you think of college basketball, no powerhouse comes to mind before the Duke Blue Devils. Year after year, they pick up the highest touted recruits, players that are undoubtedly one-and-dones, players that appear ready to define the next generation, and especially during Coach K's tenure, have been in the national championship conversations year after year after year. But for whatever reason, this unending pipeline of elite amateur players to collegiate superstars appears to fail to produce NBA talent, while their competition at the top seems to be operating NBA player factories. For every Jason Tatum and Kyrie Irving, there's a Jahlil Okafor and Christian Laettner. But even for the most successful players in the historic school's history, the path is never as easy as we believed it would be, which leads people to ask, what the hell is wrong with Duke basketball? Even though he hasn't played college basketball in over 30 years, I think you could make a pretty valid argument for Christian Laettner to still be the poster boy for Duke basketball. His 4 years at Duke made up one of the most notorious careers in college basketball history. This guy was a hitmaker. His game winner against Kentucky in '92 was known as the Shot because of the impact it had. It propelled them to win their second straight natty and cemented him as one of the greatest, but especially most hated sports athletes of all time.
Better shooting range. There's the pass to Laettner. Puts it up. Yes!
Laettner was a man amongst boys in college, man. And for better or for worse, he defined Duke basketball. He was cocky. This was the best team in the country, and they'd let you know. And it stings just a bit extra when the guy you hate is every bit as good as he thinks he is. I mean, this guy was dropping over 20 a game on skill alone. He wasn't super physically imposing. He wasn't hitting drop steps and dunking on you, but he'd bang a shoulder into your chest just enough to get a shot off, all while shooting just under 60% from the field and a crazy 56% from the three-point line his senior year on legitimate volume. He was the biggest name in college basketball, and it wasn't even close. He was on the dream team before touching the NBA. He was one of the most famous collegiate players to ever suit up, and for good reason. Going into the '92 draft, despite the sheer amount of hatred towards him, everyone felt like he was going to be a sure prospect. After all, he'd won pretty much everything you could possibly win at the college level. What was to say that he couldn't step up and do it again? Well, he did come out strong as a rookie, averaging 18-9 on a Minnesota team that didn't have much going for them. He was on the all-rookie team, but the thing is, you can't really tell how much that 18-9 meant if you're playing for one of the worst franchises ever, because someone had to score the ball and someone had to clean the glass. That season he shot 4 for 40 from 3, turned the ball over a lot, and fouled almost 4 times per game. The cutesy skill set he had at the collegiate level didn't immediately translate. While having to guard grown men with mortgages and families instead of fraternity brothers, it gave him a brutal reality check. At Duke, he was on top of the world. He was winning, he was dominant, then you put him on the Timberwolves where he loses 63 games and this dude shits his pants a bit. He tried to keep his spirits high, but when you literally go through 4 coaches in 3.5 seasons, it's pretty hard to. It got to him. The Timberwolves were a brand new team and had the messiest expansion you could have, and the drafting and misutilization of Laettner was a part of that. Where you land in the draft matters, man. I mean, could you imagine taking Kobe Bryant off the Lakers and actually plopping him in Charlotte? Laettner had this arrogance to him. He was the biggest villain of all time. Darth Vader, the Joker, whatever the fuck you wanted to call him, that's who he was. But if he wasn't actually winning, no one would have cared. It's the chip on his shoulder that the world wanted to see him fail. And that's what fueled one of the greatest college careers in history. But plop this dude into a city most Americans can't point to on a map, into games that no one's watching, and what you get is a mediocre power forward. Coach K was a genius at Duke for how he funneled that passion into winning, but Sidney Lowe and Bill Blair weren't exactly doing that. If they did, they'd at least be somewhat memorable. Instead, the many Timberwolves coaches and executives as a whole saw him as arrogant and spoiled. They didn't understand it, and it literally put Laettner in the worst possible position right out of college. He would finally break out of Minnesota and go to Atlanta, where he became an all-star in his first full season, after putting up similar numbers as he did on Minnesota, but on a winning team. Still, that would be his only all-star season. He would bounce around from team to team till his career was over, and never really had that significant of a season again. He flip-flopped from playing the 4 and the 5s and couldn't stick with one team for too long. Laettner's weird, man. There were so many abnormal parts of his career that when you put them all together, the result was basically the most normal career you could think of for a top pick. He was a finesse player at a time where bigs were asked to be power lifters. He was an arrogant asshole asked to carry the most irrelevant franchise in all of sports. He had a play style well ahead of his time, but instead of being praised as a pioneer for the modern stretch four, he's met with criticism for an NBA career which ultimately felt like a letdown. But at least he was more successful than his college point guard Bobby Hurley, who took the reins for a season after Laettner. It was a tale of two careers in college. 3 years with Laettner, feeding him the ball, averaging about 12 and 8 while knocking down his three balls at 42%. Then taking the reins as a first option, as a 17 and 8 stud as a senior. Hurley was a lottery pick, despite his small size at 6 foot flat. He was the hidden genius behind a pair of collegiate championships, and especially at the time, jewelry and the ability to win in whatever role you need to play was valued over raw production. Bob entered the draft as what felt like a safe pick before going number 7 to the Sacramento Kings. I mean, Hurley wasn't going to be a Steve Nash, but Hurley was a consistent starter on a good team type of point guard, who could feed the King star in Mitch Richmond and start to solidify the core that they were going for. Everyone needs their point guard after all. Bobby had a few kinks to roll out when cranking up the speed tenfold in the NBA, but after just 19 games, this guy's career and life would be altered forever. Hurley was smoked by a station wagon while he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He was lucky to come out alive. He was launched more than 100 feet from his car, suffered 2 collapsed lungs, broken ribs, a compression fracture in his back, and many other injuries. In fact, if he hadn't fractured as many ribs as he did, his heart wouldn't be able to pump blood. But luckily, air was able to escape his chest cavity and leak throughout his body. Understandably, the injury changed him. He was already a frail guy at 165, but the accident brought him down to a measly 140 pounds. It took him weeks to be able to sit up, and longer to be able to walk. It was going to be a long road to recovery, and no one really knew if he was going to play again. But they did know that he couldn't come back the same. After an extensive rehab process, Hurley was able to make it back to an NBA floor. But to say it was a real success isn't even close to the truth. He lost his explosiveness, couldn't get back to the weight he once was, and because of the injury started fighting mental demons as well. He was shooting sub 40% from the field. With extended playing time in his third year, he was shooting sub 30%. The safe bet that was Bobby Hurley turned into a complete disaster due to an untimely accident that killed his career entirely. He was out of the league in 5 years, but he didn't get to go out on his own terms. He left the league with the question, what could Bobby Hurley have become if that crash never happened? That question has become a theme for many different Duke stars, and the same was the case with another one of Hurley's teammates in Grant Hill. Hill was another pivotal player on those championship teams. Yes, we haven't even made it past the 1990 Duke roster, but Hill wasn't like Hurley or Laettner in really any way. Laettner and Hurley dominated college because they were pretty much 85 to 90% of a finished product by the time they closed out their college careers. With Hill, it felt like this was just the beginning. He was an elite scorer, defender, rebounder, he could do it all, dude, and gained him enough traction to go 3rd overall in the 1994 draft. In his NBA career, it was the same story. He was the co-rookie of the year while averaging 20, 6, and 5, and he got better in every season. He was a kind of point forward, and was an All-NBA first-teamer and top 3 in MVP voting by just his 3rd season. He was in legit talks to be one of the new faces of the league once MJ retired, and those takes were easily validated. He was a clear top 10 player in the league by 2000. He was dropping 25 a game, and he was carrying the Pistons roster. Other than Hill, these guys were really lacking. But the way that this guy could penetrate, dunk on somebody's head, get to the line, kick out to teammates, it felt like Grant Hill was the Pistons for a while after their bad boys run. But just before the 2000s playoff, the injury bug bit. Near the end of the season, when his ankle was already clearly hurt, he pulled himself from a game while fans crying about how he was just trying to save his free agency from any potential risks. Team doctors called it a bone bruise, but just 2 games into the playoffs, he heard a pop in his ankle. It was broken, and as a result of proving himself to people he didn't need to prove wrong, the Pistons lost their star. Hill's 2000 free agency was one of the most anticipated of his time. Originally, he was just going to go to Orlando without the Pistons getting anything in return, before things changed and Detroit was able to get at least a little something. Or well, what was thought to be a little something, which turned out to be one of the best defenders of all time in Ben Wallace. He was going to be paired with Tracy McGrady in what was going to be one of the most exciting new duos in the league, despite Hill's injury issues. But Detroit wasn't the only place that messed up his diagnosis. He went to Orlando about 3 months off his surgery, and in the next month, he was practicing with the team again, way earlier than he needed to be. He would only play in 4 games in his first season with Orlando, but still get into the All-Star game based purely on how good he was in the past. In the next season, he only played in 14, and the one after that, 29. In March 2003, he underwent a major surgery where doctors realigned his ankle, but just 5 days after the surgery, he was rushed back to the hospital with a life-threatening infection. He would miss the entire 2003-2004 season due to that surgery. We saw the best version of Hill in the season right before his injury, and there probably would have been many more exciting seasons had he been able to stay healthy. But instead, both his on and off the court lives were totally fucked. Both his on and off the court lives were affected. The injuries made him want to straight up quit. People counted him out, and even at home, he couldn't escape it when one of his daughter's first words was ankle. He would come back for the 04-05 season, play in 67 games, get back into the All-Star game thanks to fan voting, and score 20 points per game on about 50% shooting. He was back, sort of. But by then, things were drastically different in Orlando. T-Mac was gone, and any ounce of excitement towards Hill was gone as well. His one last All-Star season was fun to watch, but in the next season, he played just 21 games, and legitimate retirement rumors started to pop up. Despite that, he'd end up signing with the Suns, but for a much smaller amount of money. His salary went from about $17 million to $2 million, just like that. But the guy had barely scratched 200 games in his 7 seasons with Orlando. Hill finished off his career as a pretty capable role player and a defensive stopper on the Steve Nash Suns. It was still an 18-year career, but in reality, it felt just like a career that dragged on forever past those first 7 years with Detroit. Grant Hill in a different timeline is that generational type of talent that we saw blooming. But unfortunately, in the world we live in, the surreal talents of Grant Hill was just a crutch between the Bad Boys Pistons and the 2000s Pistons. And next, we have what might be the most tragic one of all. You had Bobby Hurley and his near-death experience, and you've had plenty of guys who just weren't what people thought they'd be. But then, there's Jay Williams, who had to pretty much completely put down the game. I'm sure everyone loves waking up in the morning to hear whatever ESPN is feeding Jay, but back in the day, he was giving it to people on the court. I mean, he helped carry Duke to a national championship, went back for another year to run it back, and got National Player of the Year honors as well. He was incredible, man. As a highly athletic dribble drive guy shooting 43% from deep, his ceiling was high. And if not for Yao Ming being a freak in nature, Jay would have gone first overall. Landing in Chicago with the 2nd overall pick, he was supposed to be the new face of the Bulls, and for a season, it appeared to be true. Sure, his numbers were kinda mid, and sure, he wasn't shooting super efficiently, but it wasn't one of those rookie seasons that made you actively grimace in the realization that the player was a bust. It was just a feeling out process, and it seemed to be natural for Williams. By the end of the season, he was shooting, scoring, and passing better than he did at the start of the year. He was clearly developing. But then, reality hit him. Hard. One June night, he was riding his Yamaha motorcycle unlicensed, recklessly, and without a helmet, and rammed it right into a streetlight at an intersection. Like Hurley, he was just lucky to be alive. But the injuries that he sustained were still incredibly gruesome. Severed nerve, fractured pelvis, torn ACL, loss of use in his leg for a while. It was tragic, and it was to the point where the Bulls had to shift their entire future. He wasn't allowed to be riding a motorcycle anyways, for contractual purposes, but the Bulls weren't just going to cut him off completely. They gave him plenty of money to deal with rehab and whatever else he needed. They also ended up having to waive him and start from square one. It's impossible to tell what the Bulls and Williams would have looked like years down the line. He was probably going to be better than his replacement Kirk Hinrich, but the coaching, culture, and leadership when he got there was in shambles. It would have taken years to figure out if he would have ended up being the perennial all-star or maybe even the superstar that Chicago was hoping for when he fell into their hands. New Pistons team president, Trajan, the Alaskan assassin Langdon, or the J.J. Redick before J.J. Redick, came into the league in 1999 as the 11th overall pick and was expected to be another great shooting guard in the league. Due to a knee injury, he spent 5 years at Duke, but he shot 44% from three twice, while shooting 7 threes per game in one of those seasons. He broke Duke records and was a decent overall athlete. I mean, the guy was playing minor league baseball in the summer while torching threes at Duke during the season. The guy was a psychopath. Granted, he was playing rookie and single-A ball, but that's better than any of us played. Unfortunately, the NBA wasn't ready for him. His NBA career was 3 seasons only, but he never got to play the game the way he wanted to. He never shot 2 or more threes per game, despite shooting at a very solid clip. He was smacking over 40% of his three-point looks, 90% of his free throws, actually shot 100% for his rookie season, and was still out of the league within 3 seasons. I mean, for Trajan, this shit really was wrong place, wrong time. If we could fast forward Father Time and drop him in the current NBA, this guy wouldn't light the world on fire, but he could be another fucking Davis Bertans. At least there was somewhat of a success story for the Alaskan, though. He would get waived by the Clippers at the start of what would have been his 4th season, so he decided to just give it up and go play in the EuroLeague. In his first EuroLeague season, he shot over 50% from 3 and played his way onto an NBA roster, easily. NBA teams were calling, they knew they screwed up by not taking advantage of his shooting earlier, but after going to Russia, he didn't want to go back, and I don't really blame him either. There was no saying that he would have been secure in the NBA. He fizzled out of the league originally because of a misunderstanding, and then by choice. It would have been really nice to get to know Langdon better in the NBA scene because his combination of skill, IQ, and clutch play was truly special. It just wasn't in the cards for him. When it comes to the 2000s, a name that often gets overlooked on the college and NBA scene is Elton Brand. As the National Player of the Year with close to 20 and 10 as an elite shot blocker and sneaky good passing lane threat, Elton Brand brought an element of two-way consistency that may not have been the most unique or flashy, but your win columns certainly didn't care. When Elton Brand became Duke's first #1 pick since 1963, he gave a lot of Chicago fans hope that they could retain a contending roster after MJ's departure. Honestly, he was still one of the best in that class as it didn't have many outstanding players, especially if you go off how his career started. He showed off his brute force as a rookie, averaging 20 and 10, and winning Rookie of the Year, while helping the Bulls stay relevant with the highest attendance in the league, even if most of that number came from the MJ hype that stayed alive. In the next 7 seasons, he'd keep that 20 and 10 average, get into the All-Star game twice, even throughout the chaos of that awkward trade where the Bulls swapped him and Tyson Chandler. From the 2000 to 2007 season, so no small sample size, Elton Brand was a hit. 20 and 10 average, bringing that same consistency he provided at the college level. It wasn't the most exciting thing to watch this burly dude bully people in the paints or hit mid and range catch and shoots, but this guy was truly everything that we expected, which is no small feat when you're the best player in college basketball. So where does his career go south? Well, prior to the 08 season, he ruptured his Achilles in a summer workout. He was just 28 years old, in what at the time was the beginning of his absolute prime. He was top 10 in MVP voting, he was arguably a top 8 or so player in the world, and was entering the season right before his free agency, and just like that, it was gone. He was still a top free agent and ended up going to Philly, but would endure a season-ending shoulder surgery after fighting a rough injury, having just played 29 games. The injury bug had officially bit him. He was already on the downhill. An Achilles injury for anyone is devastating, but it's catastrophic for a big man like Brand. In his last fully healthy season, he averaged 20. And in his first full season after his Achilles injury, he averaged just 13 and 6. It's hard to say how much longer he could have sustained that 20 and 10 type of play, especially when you take into account how the game was starting to change around him, but given his age and his track record pre-injury, I think that a few more people would recognize him as a household name had we gotten just a few more years of a prime Elton Brand. Jabari Parker is another name that had to switch up his NBA aspirations to go to Europe after one of the unluckiest NBA careers I have ever seen. He was a massive prospect back then, but who isn't if you play for Duke, I guess. He, like many others, was on the path to superstardom. #1 prospect in the country, #1 collegiate player donning the same jersey as so many with the same path. And come college, he certainly didn't disappoint. Jabari won every award possible at Duke. He was dropping close to 20 and 10 as a 3-level scoring threat that looked ready to be drag and dropped onto any NBA team. He was on track to be another Carmelo Anthony, he had that type of feel. But his NBA career was a fucking nightmare. 25 games into his career, he tore his ACL. The injury extended into the next season, but after a long road to recovery, he was back. The Bucks were extremely careful with their young star. They didn't want anything to happen again. They rested him in back-to-backs, and for a couple of seasons he was promising. He played 76 games in his second season, and 50 games into his third. He was cooking. He averaged 26 and 3, and the Bucks were slowly coming along. Jabari wasn't the perfect player, but the Bucks were ready to give him all the time he needed, and he did the most with it. Until a second ACL tear took all that progress, all that care, and all that hard work and threw it in the trash. It was the same knee too. He would come back for a bit in the next season, but he was nothing close to what he was before the injury. Jabari went from a top prospect to a piece no team valued in the slightest due to just 2 missteps. He spent some time in the G League to try to get his footing back, but he just wasn't valuable anymore. He signed with Chicago that next offseason, but he was so worn down that people looked at him like a has-been. Whatever defense he had completely fallen apart. He quickly turned into a journeyman because of it. No one wanted him bad enough. And eventually, he took his talents overseas. After what appears to be some pretty dark days, coming to peace with the fact that everything he worked for was taken from him, and no wrongdoing from himself, Jabari has been seen breaking down into tears when talking about his NBA run, leaving us with one of the most depressing doses of reality in NBA history. Next, we've got Jahlil Okafor. Now, Okafor only played 1 year at Duke, but left a legacy as good as anyone during that time. They called his postgame Tim Duncan or Al Jefferson-esque. I mean, he was just toying with dudes, and won almost everything you could at the collegiate level. He was Player of the Year, National Champion, and although not being thought of as the best prospect potential-wise, was looked at as the best college player in the nation. He could dream shake you out of your shoes up and under 47 times until he got the look he wanted. It was clear he knew how to use his size and score in the post, and took inspiration off of some big men that he likely grew up watching. Jahlil was selected 3rd overall right behind Cat and D'Lo. He slid 1 spot in the draft compared to the mock, and 2 spots throughout his college season, but nonetheless was supposed to be the next traditional big man to dominate the league. But that was the problem. Interior scoring bigs weren't going to dominate the league anymore, or more so, the NBA wasn't going to let them. Sure, he could put the ball in the basket during his rookie season, averaging 17 points per game, but there was a reason why that only got him to 5th in Rookie of the Year voting. Embiid was hurt, and this was Okafor's team, which resulted in a disgustingly bad 10-win season. His numbers were slashed to 12-5 when Philly became a semi-respectable team, while getting worse and worse in the following years. You can't dominate in the NBA like you could against random farmer boys in college, like Okafor did most of the time. His weaknesses eventually got exposed. It was unfortunate, but definitely foreseeable. Every time this guy got the rock, he was looking to score. He could get you 20 points, but on 20 shots. He wasn't drawing tons of fouls, he was good for a 50% look at the basket every time, which during the three-point era wasn't up to league efficiency. A good way to put it is his draft comparison was already a dinosaur in the league, so logically, Okafor was going to follow in his steps. He bounced around the league after his rookie season and played 6 years and 1 random game for the Pacers last season after being out of the league since 2021. To be fair, Okafor's success speaks volumes to how good of a basketball university Duke is. Under Coach K, Okafor was unstoppable, a national champ, and an award demon. He was played in that system perfectly in order to go as the 3rd best player in the draft. But when it comes to college success versus NBA production, Jahlil Okafor may be the worst product that Duke has ever produced. And then you've got his teammate Justice Winslow. Winslow came into the league with your typical one-and-done wing story. Oh, he has an NBA-ready body, he just needs that NBA development. He was still very good in college, don't get me wrong. He played an incredible role on a national championship winning team that wasn't overshadowed too much by the elite group of guys that he played around. He could score at every level. He was a good defender, and had the makings of a solid role player at least. But even better going into the draft, his tournament play was some of his best basketball, when he shot the ball with 51, 57, 76 splits while averaging 14 and 9. Dude was athletic, could switch on the wing, shoot the ball a little bit, handle and facilitate, think another Andre Iguodala type of talent. All-time great role player with star potential. I mean, that's the kind of upside we were looking at. Winslow did make a mark in his rookie season, to be fair. He took care of business on defense, took tougher assignments, and put his time in to earn a starting role in his 2nd season. But after starting 9, he'd missed 16 games with a sore wrist, before missing out on most of the season with a torn labrum that February. He would come back in the next season, but he hadn't kept the starting role he had won in the last year. Yes, his defense was good, but his offense wasn't great at all. He wasn't the best scorer, and Miami didn't really know what to do with him. I mean, they even rolled him out as their point guard at one point, which ended pretty poorly. The opposite of the norm happens. Normally, you're supposed to solidify your role within the team as time passes. Winslow's role just got more and more cluttered. A lot of this did happen because he wasn't able to stay on the court health-wise, which was the eventual downfall of his career. He had the wrist and labrum issues, but in the 1920 season, a back strain, concussion, and further sidelining due to his back forced him out of all but 11 games. He would end up getting moved to Memphis in the midst of this, and was supposed to show up ready to play for the bubble, but during a team practice, he hurt his hip, which ultimately required hip replacement surgery. Then after going to Portland, he hurt his ankle and had to go under again for season-ending surgery. It's really hard to pick up a player with the laundry list of injuries like Winslow's, but when he has an uncertain role pretty much everywhere he goes because of the awkward gaps in his game, it's even harder to find a reason to gamble. His 8-year career was filled with so much turbulence because of it, and you can't really blame teams for failing to find out what exactly to do with him, because it felt like the second you got him back from an injury, he was out with another one. Now, Cam Reddish should have turned out to be much more than he is. I mean, right now he's fighting for his life to even stay in the league if he can get back in. Cam Reddish basically peaked in high school at this point, where he slotted in as the third best player in his class. Where his career immediately began to spiral was joining up with the top 2 recruits at Duke, becoming the third option with Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett. He still showed out in flashes, but his lack of consistency in college was the real story, and had NBA scouts leaving a big question mark on their clipboard. He averaged 13.5 points per game, but shot pretty terribly for being the third option, including shooting 33% from 3 on 7 attempts per game. So why did he go number 10 in the draft? Potential, which can be a very dangerous thing with a lot of these guys, especially when it's a guy like Reddish, who was taken almost purely based off that. There were plenty of guys who scored more, shot better, and were just better overall in college. I mean, Cam was a bad college player overall, but his 6'8 frame and 7-foot wingspan and what we saw, mixed with what we saw in high school, looked like a gamble worth taking for some teams. The one thing that he did already have locked down was that he was a pretty good defender. In fact, most scouts believed it could be his greatest asset. He could be a perimeter stopper and turn into one of the best in the league if he developed the way that people hoped he would. People had him going top 5 and even top 3 if you could imagine that. That's how good some people believed he could be. In the 2019-2020 rookie survey, despite not being close to the favorite to win Rookie of the Year, he was the favorite to have the best career overall. People were crazy high about this kid. So let's see what he ended up doing once he arrived. Well, it wasn't much because, surprise, he was incredibly inefficient. With the Hawks, he was able to be a good enough do-it-all player to warrant a decent amount of starts within his 2.5 seasons there, but he didn't have that it factor that a lot of people in the league thought he would have. But a lot of that was because we didn't see a lot of him. There were plenty of injuries, and he also didn't really seem to care that much. And with those 3 things, you aren't going to have a good career. His most successful stint was, well, not really anywhere. He never had a 60-game season, never shot 40% from 3 or anything. He never solidified his place anywhere, bouncing around on 4 teams in 6 seasons. His career splits are 40, 32, and 82. People were just too high on this kid. He has the physical measurements to be your typical $20 million a year guy on a close to contending team who goes out there, knocks down some threes, and gives you some good perimeter defense. But instead, he went to Lithuania before deciding to leave because of some personal reasons. Man, he was really just cooked from the start, and no one saw it coming. Austin Rivers is a very unique case in the Duke bust discussion, because while he never reached his full potential, he still carved out a long and mostly healthy career. Just having the name Rivers on his back meant a lot before his college days. He was considered to be the best at his position in high school, he dropped maybe the most famous high school tape in history, and was consistently somewhere in the top 3 overall. He was an incredibly good scorer, but didn't need the ball in his hands to be productive. Most of his weaknesses were some he needs to fix his stance type shit, but overall he was big time. He went to Duke, won ACC Rookie of the Year while averaging 15.5 points per game as their primary scorer alongside Seth Curry and Mason Plumlee. But a round 1, 2 vs 15 seed upset against Lehigh cut any championship hopes they had short. And that was it for his college career. He would go 10th overall to New Orleans and play with rookie phenom Anthony Davis in an attempt to get New Orleans fans excited about their Chris Paul-less franchise. But it wouldn't happen that quickly. The Hornets' leading scorers in Rivers' first season were Ryan Anderson, Eric Gordon, and Gravis Vasquez, so you'd think that the Hornets would at least try to get their rookies involved a little bit more. It was clearly just another rebuilding year, but Rivers at least would never get going. He averaged 6 points per game, and did so on pretty poor 37, 33, and 55 splits. He began the season in the starting lineup before getting relegated to the bench, so it's not like he was seeing the floor either. Well, until he broke his hand in the closing stages of the season. Luckily, that injury wouldn't keep him out for any of the now Pelicans next season. It would be the same story with Rivers shooting inefficiently, though, and proving to fans that maybe he wasn't the scorer and playmaker that people made him out to be. But the Pelicans were alright with keeping him. Before they traded him, they picked up what would have been his 4th-year team option, but I think that his 28% shooting in the 35 games he did play for New Orleans in his 3rd season made them rethink that decision. But there would be one happy ending here, because he would end up with the Clippers where Doc, his dad, was coaching. I think that by then Rivers knew that he was not going to be a superstar or anything close to that, and so it became a sink or swim situation. Year after year in LA, he got slightly better, to the point where he was a solid starter, averaging 15 points per game and shooting 38% from 3-point land. That was the best he would ever get, As always, it's hard to hate on someone who's able to work their way to vet status in the league, but people thought so much of him before he came into the league, or even before he went to Duke. He had a rough time adjusting to the league before figuring it out as a run-of-the-mill role player. But at least it's something, right? Either way, the fact that Rivers is one of the most successful Duke players of his era tells you a lot about how tragic most of these guys' NBA careers turned out to be. Now, Harry Giles has turned into one of the biggest what-ifs in basketball history, not only at the NBA level, but just his entire recruiting journey. He was a consensus 5-star, one of the most dangerous players in high school, and eventually made his commitment to Duke. Frank Jackson, Jason Tatum, and Marquise Bolden all joined him there. There was one problem, though: his knees. He dominated in high school, but in his senior season, he partially tore his ACL. 2 years before that, he blew up his knees even worse, tearing his ACL, MCL, and meniscus all in one go. He had 2 knee surgeries before even graduating high school, and had a third before his freshman season just to make sure that everything was going to be alright. As a result, his freshman season was just remnants of his true potential. Despite only averaging 4-4, he would only spend 1 season in college before declaring for the draft. It was a complete gamble to take him, because not only did he have glaring injury issues, but he also failed to really prove himself at the college level due to minutes restrictions, simply because he couldn't. Duke teams are always stacked with talent, and Giles struggled to keep up even if it was his body's fault. It was high risk, high reward. No one really knew the risk of re-injury, no one knew if he could get back to the level that he was. After going to the Kings, those questions became real. I mean, the Kings don't really scream functionality anyways, but despite that, the Kings were very cautious with him. He didn't play in the summer league, he sat out for his entire rookie season. It was clear that both Giles and the team were both determined to get it right. He would come to his official rookie season and show flashes of what made him so exciting, like his crafty passing and elite athleticism. But before he came in, people were talking like he would be Sacramento's savior. Every time it felt like he was close to his old self, his body would hit another wall. He was a Sacramento favorite in his time there, but after they decided to decline his 4th-year team option, he became a reminder of how rough King fans have it. Even if you have a guy with injury problems like Giles, he was still 22 and still had at least some potential. Your team was coming off a 31-win season, and it was pretty clear that they weren't going to magically become contenders. It didn't make sense. He would go spend some time in Portland, Brooklyn, LA, and the G League, while making some side money with a trucking business in the meantime. But to go from a potential number 1 prospect to starting just 17 games in your entire career is a pretty brutal downfall. Now, Sheldon Williams is the perfect example of an awkward mid-2000s NBA bust. He was an absolute beast in the paint and on the glass in his 4-year college career, becoming a consensus All-American by the end of his tenure. He was a burly power forward with a no-nonsense approach, an extremely strong body, and deceptive quickness. He won the National Defensive Player of the Year award twice, and earned the nickname the Landlord. He still holds the record for the most blocks and rebounds in Duke history. Similar to Brand, a few years prior, scouts expected him to come in and make an immediate impact, and with the 5th pick, the Hawks pulled the trigger. He was a starter the second he got in the league, but something was just off. He didn't play and dominate the way people were used to. He averaged 8 points and 7.5 rebounds per game, but there was a disconnect. He was a smaller big man, but didn't have the athleticism to make up for it. He didn't have the best feel for the game offensively, and he wasn't the defensive superstar he needed to be because of his physical attributes. Maybe for Williams, the problem was that he wasn't as good without Coach K on the sideline. Maybe he needed that extra motivation to perform on a nightly basis. I mean, Coach K was that good of a coach, so it's surely not out of the question. Being in a college scene with a coach as good as that is not the same as having to motivate yourself to put in the work day in and day out. People complained about him being lazy throughout his career, and maybe they were onto something. This guy just couldn't stick to one team. He played for 7 teams in 6 seasons while never reaching the heights, if you even want to call them that, of his rookie season. He went from being considered, at the very least, a solid pick on draft day to averaging 4.5 points over his sad career. He did pull Candace Parker though, so good for him, I guess. Now, Marvin Bagley. Where do we even begin? Bagley gets clowned on pretty hard nowadays, but the guy was supposed to be a phenom. Originally, he was supposed to be the top prospect in the class that included Zion and RJ Barrett. Talk about oversaturated talent if they all ended up at Duke. But anyways, he ended up reclassifying and was still the top prospect in that class. ESPN's Paul Bencardi said that he may be the best prospect I've ever seen in my time at ESPN. At one point, the buzz around him was insane. He had double-doubles in both of his first 2 college games, and carried that dominance throughout the rest of the season, finishing with 21 and 11 on 61% shooting from the field. and lost to Kansas in overtime in the Elite Eight. But then again, he was doing the normal Duke thing, and no one really knew what his potential could be when his back was against the wall. Still, a lot of teams felt like he was a safe pick after what they saw, and the Kings took him second overall, even though there were other guys, especially Luka Doncic, on the board. Sure, Bagley fit well because they had Fox, but when you're in the trenches like they were, you have to try to land that superstar talent, and Bagley will always be linked to that, because surprise, surprise, he wasn't playing Utah Valley or Furman anymore. Bagley also fits right under Sheldon Williams because he was a tweener as well. He was either too unskilled or too weak, depending on the night, and it showed after he sat behind Bjelica for a full season. He also forced the Kings to take minutes away from Harry Giles too. So not only are you picking the wrong guy, but you're also screwing over another young prospect. Plus, as repetitive as it sounds, injuries caught up to him. He fractured his thumb and only played 13 games in his second season. He had a foot injury, another hand injury. It was a laundry list. Eventually, things went south in Sacramento after the frustration and entitlements he had been carrying around with him surfaced. All his life, he was supposed to be the top guy, but all of a sudden, he had to resort to being a role player. He didn't like it, and that led to a contract dispute, which led him to leaving Sacramento. His play was fairly similar everywhere he went, but fast forward to now, and he has taken on the role of a 26-year-old veteran on a team trying to find their next leader. But then again, he's only 26. Some people don't get into their prime until after, but I think it's safe to say that he's not going to have a breakout season anytime soon. So now let's take a bit of a turn with these last few names, because they've undoubtedly been more successful at the professional level than any of the other guys we've covered thus far. But still, they've been troubled. You know, you have your JJ Redicks or your Luol Dengs, and it's hard to hate. Deng terrorized opponents, and JJ was so good at what he did, especially in his best years. But then you've got Kyrie Irving, Zion Williamson, and even Jason Tatum, who've hit some rough stretches as of late in their career. First, you've got Kyrie, who is undoubtedly one of the most polarizing players of the century. While his talent is divine, his career has turned into a list of positives and negatives. He's a 9-time All-Star and NBA champ, and has solidified himself as one of, if not the most skilled player of all time, with his smooth, unique, and influential control on the ball. But some of his implosions have overridden that championship or the memories of his younger years. You had his whole Boston business, where after 2 fairly successful seasons, he shocked fans by publicly stating that he would come back and re-sign with the team before never really even giving them a chance, and had an absolute stinker in the playoffs before going to Brooklyn. Around this time was when I think people started to realize that he was a bit off. Think of a conspiracy and he's probably been deep into it at some point. The earth is flat, the moon landing is fake, aliens exist, and then he became an anti-vaxxer when it became a requirement after COVID to get the vaccine, if he wanted to play in Brooklyn at least. He was only allowed to come back because the team's depth had gotten so thin and because they needed him that badly. It kept him outside of the NBA's 75th anniversary team as well. The whole tirade cost the Nets whatever hopes they had in the Kyrie, Harden, and KD idea as well. He also got in trouble for reposting a book full of anti-Semitism, which added another reason for him to be an outcast in the NBA. I do have to say, when he went to Dallas, he certainly had a bit of a renaissance. He barely saw the floor during his Brooklyn tenure, but became a major part of a finals team just a season and a half after people were calling for his head. And then there was the ACL tear, which came from the built-up pressure of having to do way too much for an organization that had just traded their superstar away. So yeah, there have been good moments, but it's a shame that a player of his skill level will be remembered for the bad as well. There may be a little bit of recency bias here, but what happened to Tatum is certainly crushing as well. He literally just proved his haters wrong by winning a title dominantly before seeing it all come apart just like that. Sure, the Celtics are looking at least competitive right now, but a torn ACL is no joke, and he's just 27 years old. He should be playing prime level basketball right now, but instead he's having to go through months of rehab just to get on the floor. But lastly, I think you have to talk about Zion's career as a whole, because while at the end of the day jokes are jokes, Zion's yearly cycle is too bad to overlook. All-star talent, absolutely. Would I trust him on my team? Not even close. Since being drafted number 1 in 2019, he's been MIA more often than not. When he entered the league, people wondered if he could maintain his level of play for long, and at this point, it's safe to say that that question has been answered. In 7 years, he's played just about 220 games and only has 2 seasons that are worth noting. The saddest part about it too is that he is legitimately scary when he's on the floor. He's undoubtedly an all-star, but he's turned into a national punchline. When it's gotten to the point where your team has to put a weight clause in place to make sure that you're staying in line, something's off. Ex-players and media come out blasting him left and right about it too, and he hasn't really been able to pick himself back up. It seems like this season he is staying on track for his average 30-40 game season, while the Pelicans are the laughingstock of the Western Conference. He still hasn't played in a playoff game, even in the seasons where his team made it. He famously missed the 24 playoffs after a hamstring strain came up in the play-in game, and the Pelicans just aren't good enough without him to do anything close to playoff worthy. So between these three stars, but especially with Kyrie and Zion, there's a theme of a bit of unreliability. Tatum can't help that he blew out his knee, but the other two are a bit more embarrassing. Kyrie alienated himself from the rest of the league and has become unreliable with many of his choices. And Zion is unreliable for a few reasons. His weight, his health, there's a lot going on for the guy. The Duke basketball curse surely is a weird one. The reason we're even talking about it in the first place is the highs that Duke and its cast are consistently able to reach, while on the other side of the coin, the highs make the lows all that more interesting. Throughout recent years, it's certainly true that Duke prospects have came around in the NBA, but if that means the curse is forever lifted, or just a bright spot in an otherwise decades-long trap, only time will tell.